The duel continues under the continental sun between the two outstanding individuals in this year's Tour de France. Greg LeMond, the American, striving for his first ever victory. Bernard Hinault, who could make it a record 6 wins in this absorbing test of stamina, strength and willpower. A year ago, this stage nearly finished him. He crashed in the final sprint at St Etienne, damaged his ribs and broke his nose. Somehow he carried on and still won the Tour, with LeMond second. And while those two battle for cycling's most glamorous prize, our own Robert Miller reflects on the cruel luck that destroyed his challenge. He looked shattered after trailing in way down the field on Monday, and it emerged he'd been struck down by a throat infection, which seriously affected his performance. His pulse, which normally runs at 42, had leapt to 62 before the start. Here's hoping he feels better today. Good evening to you on this auspicious day, the first chance the royal family's had since the wedding to find out exactly what's been happening in the Tour de France. It's stage 19 from Villard-de-Lans to St Etienne, 179 kilometres, about 110 miles, and one severe climb. That's the Col de Loyant, nearly 4,000 feet, but there are other climbs too, as you can see, and one startling descent, so the riders very much up and down throughout the day, just like the grand old Duke of York. Well, let's find out how they managed as we join our commentators Paul Sherwin and Phil Liggett.
And Nick, as you join us again, we're back on the route of the Tour de France after the rest day in Alpe d'Huez, and Julian Gorospe of Spain is our leader on the foothill slopes of the Col de Loyant. This is the rider in second place, but would you believe he's over 10 minutes behind Gorospe at the moment, Luis Herrera, and Herrera was the winner of this stage into St Etienne last year. There is confirmation, not quite 10 minutes, in fact, 9.5. It's a long, long way for Herrera to have to make up on this climb, but this young man from Bogota is a marvellous climber, and this Tour de France for him has been so disappointing. He almost abandoned on the climb of Alpe d'Huez, and he actually said, I wish I had, during the rest day yesterday. But here he is, he's been talked around by his manager, Raphael Geminion. He's psyched up to come out and show that he is a good climber and he can still get something out of this Tour de France. Well, Paul, it's our first chance to see Herrera really in action this year, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting to note that it's the same climb where Herrera attacked last year to win the stage into St Etienne. And although Gorospe is something like 9 minutes in front of Herrera, there's still the possibility that Herrera can close this gap, because being such a fantastic climber, he can possibly pull back 40 seconds every kilometre on Gorospe, who's been away for a long, long time. So if Herrera can catch Gorospe before the summit, Herrera could do a fantastic ride here and get away to win again in St Etienne.
So steady pace making by Gorospe on the front. A good day, Paul, to choose to try and attack?
Well, the day after the rest day is always a very good day to choose to attack, because some riders have well recovered on the rest day, and other riders got very sore legs because instead of being very serious and staying in bed and looking after themselves, they think, oh, well, it's the rest day, I'll go and have a look at the shops, I'll have a walk around. And the next day they get back in the saddle and the legs really do hurt.
Well, Paul Sherwin had the chance on the rest day to ride Alpe d'Huez with some of the riders in the Tour. And fortunately for Paul, they didn't want to go too hard yesterday, but he did find out quite a lot of useful information. Alain Bondu, I think, Paul, was saying that he felt Hinault could still win this race.
Yeah, well, he knows Bernard Hinault very well, and he was saying that although everything seems to be glorious between Hinault and Greg LeMond again, Hinault's got a secret desire to win the Tour for the 6th time, and he'd like to take LeMond on. Although he says in the press that he's only going to take him on in the time trial, I could see Hinault trying to get rid of Greg LeMond on this descent, for instance, down into St Etienne, because the other day Greg LeMond had a great deal of difficulty following Hinault down the descent. So if Hinault can force Greg to chase him down the descent, he might try and force him to crash, but that's the way the situation is at the moment, that Hinault would almost do anything to win this 6th Tour de France.
And Hinault is one of those great descenders, one of those few men that can go round these hairpin bends at high speed without overshooting and descending directly to the valleys below. That in itself has been done before in the Tour de France. And LeMond is going to have to take risks, I think, to keep up with Hinault today. And, of course, the terrible climb of the Puy de Dôme, the volcanic mountain in the middle of France, is still to come. There's no end to the mountains in this year's Tour, without doubt the hardest. And I've never seen so many riders dragging their feet around Alpe d'Huez yesterday because they are absolutely shattered. We're sorry a little bit about the picture breakup we occasionally get. We are in one of those few climbs in France where we climb amongst the trees, and this does stop our cameras beaming up the signals to the helicopter, and occasionally we do get this flickering of the picture. Nonetheless, Phil Anderson here has come up on Gilles Mars. So Anderson, who started this tour below form, he was 5th last year, is now coming back onto form. Anderson, as you can see, 74 minutes behind Greg LeMond this year, and that is a most unusual situation for Anderson to be in. He's pursuing here Luis Herrera. Herrera still ahead of the field by approaching 2 minutes, and of course Julien Gorospe is up front by the best part of 10. Well, that's the peloton, that's the main field at 6 minutes 30, so it looks as though Gorospe, Paul, is actually struggling on this climb, and that everybody behind is closing up. It could be a good finish today.
Well, Gorospe's been away for a long time now, and this is a very, very hard climb, this climb up the Col de Loyon. But if Gorospe can hold out and have something like a minute and a half in hand at the top, he stands a reasonable chance of staying away, and it looks like the bunch has come up to catch Phil Anderson here as well, who tried to counter-attack. So we've just got 2 men on the road in front of this bunch now. We've got Julien Gorospe, followed by Luis Herrera. But as I was saying, if Gorospe can get to the top of this climb with a minute and a half, he stands a very good chance of winning the stage, because the last 20 kilometres is nearly all downhill, and nobody's going to take very much time back on Gorospe if he can get over the top of this hill with just a minimum of a lead.
Well, as I say, last year Herrera crashed on the descent of the Loyon, and although he hurt his face on the left side, he did in fact find he could win the stage. Now we're seeing Bernard Hinault in a most unusual jersey there today. He's wearing, in fact, the polka dot jersey that was held by Robert Miller until the top of Alpe d'Huez. Robert lost the overall lead, and in fact the leader in the mountains competition is Greg LeMond, but because he wears the yellow jersey of leadership, and then Bernard Hinault, second in the mountains classification, is now wearing a leader's jersey. That is done, of course, so the sponsors have the publicity, but Hinault is wearing that jersey on loan, in fact, from Greg LeMond, who's in yellow today. This is the bunch, and we might have guessed why that lead of 10 minutes came down to 6 in such a short time, because the Blaireau himself, the Badger, is on the front, and again LeMond is shadowing him in second place. And this is the reason why Bernard Hinault doesn't like Greg LeMond so much, is because he never attacks, he only follows, and of course the success, the way to win the Tour de France is to be consistent and never lose time overall. And of course, it's true, isn't it, Paul? LeMond never makes mistakes because he always follows the right men.
Well, they say that to win the Tour de France, you've got to make sure you lose the least possible time every day on a regular basis. But really, to be a true winner of the Tour de France, you've got to do something brilliant. You've got to show that you're the best man in the race. And Hinault himself, he could never be quite content just to win a time trial stage. He'd always try and win a mountain stage or another stage in such a brilliant fashion that could prove to everybody that he was the best rider in the race. And apart from the breakaway that Greg LeMond did with Bernard Hinault, Greg really hasn't done anything to show that he's a rider with a lot of panache.
That's absolutely right, and of course every night now when Hinault comes up to the line at the finish, they chant his name, Hinault, Hinault, and it's getting louder by the minute, because it's their way of saying, we still like you better than LeMond, Bernard, and it's true. So there he is, the great man himself now, riding in his final Tour de France, and this is the place of Herrera, just about, we think, less than 2 minutes ahead of Hinault, and the way the cameras are switching here, it could be we're closing even quicker than that. Meanwhile, further up the climb of the Col de Loyon, we've got the leader, Julien Gorospe, and he's beginning to relax now because I think he's approaching the summit. Judging by the crowds, we could now be just over the top of the Col de Loyon for Julien Gorospe, and the long descent to St Etienne is coming up. And here comes the Hinault Express up towards the top of the Col de Loyon, and they're eating into the lead of Herrera because he's now only about 30 seconds in front, and we've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 20 riders maybe. Again, another day of selection for the leaders in the Tour de France, the strong men in this amazing race, because they've spent already 90 hours in the saddle since we set out from Paris, which seems years ago now, but in fact it's the best part of 3 weeks. There's the gap on the peloton, that's the French for the main field, of 5 minutes 10 seconds now on the leading rider, Julien Gorospe. and they are just 1 minute behind Herrera. And there is the long line of the chasing group, where Bernard Hinault will no doubt be first or second on the line. And how the scenery has changed. This is a most amazing country, France, and you get the chance to see it all when you follow the Tour de France. We've had the barren rocks of the Pyrenees, the Alps just covered in wildflowers where the butterflies are enormous, and now we're in the wooded countryside above the Loire and down in St Etienne. Here is Bernard Hinault. And what's this? This is exactly what we were saying on the descent. Once Hinault hits the downhills as well, the gaps are opening, and Hinault is taking the risks again. Now, who is the rider with him? It's Stephen Roche. Roche is now giving it a lot of effort, and this is the first time we've had the opportunity to see Stephen in action this year since his time trial, in fact, in Nantes, where he finished third. Roche is now trying to prove to himself he's coming back onto form. Third in the Tour de France last year, out all year by injury, and he's beginning to find the form. He has the form, or the condition rather, but as the riders say, without the many miles one needs in racing, they don't have the form to produce. And now, after almost 2,000 miles in the Tour de France, Roche will now feel perhaps he's got the miles. This is a great move, Paul.
Well, it's a good move for Stephen, but it's a bad move. I know we've got the bunch coming back again, and I've noticed that Greg LeMond isn't the one that bridged the gap there. He left it to somebody else. But it was nice to notice that Hinault was playing the ideal teammate, and he wasn't helping Stephen Roche. So it's difficult to say. It's difficult for anybody to know what's going on in the minds of these two riders, if they are still enemies, if they are still good friends, if Hinault is going to try and beat LeMond, if LeMond is going to try and chase down Hinault. There are so many solutions to this race at the moment that nobody can definitely say who's going to win in Paris on Sunday.
Well, all the elite in this year's Tour de France is here. We've been looking at the numbers going through our pictures, and we haven't noticed anybody missing except, I have to say, Robert Miller, who is 8th overall this morning, 26 minutes behind. And I would think that the way things are going, Robert is going to slip a little bit lower down the overall classification by the end of the stage.
But the unfortunate thing is that Robert does have a slight chest infection as well. As I said before, any rider with a chest infection in the Tour de France, they can hide themselves in the bunch on the flat stages, but on a mountain stage, when you've got to get all the oxygen into your lungs, if you've got any kind of infection, you're just limited.
Well, I think Paul agrees with me. You can't have anything but admiration for the Flying Scot. He came here to win this race. Second place was never in his mind, and he gave it 100% of effort. And I think if any athlete loses the Tour de France when he's given his all, then he really isn't a loser. He's simply a great rider. And you see again the enormous crowd that comes out onto these mountains this year. The Tour has created new interest this year because of the great race it really has been. We've never seen riders come into a race and individually destroy themselves like they have done. Here's Stephen Roche now. Roche trying again to break away from that group. He did it once before, but Hinault went with him, and that was the reason they came back. Now he's doing it again, and Hinault is not with him, so there's a good chance now that Stephen Roche is going to finish well up at St Etienne today. So Roche 56 this morning, an hour and a half almost behind Greg LeMond, and Hinault is going to go under the banner here of the Croix de Chauberey.
And it looks as if Stephen Roche is just about to catch Luis Herrera, actually, because just in front of Stephen there, I could see the neutral service car of the Mavic, and on the descent, Stephen's probably going to pick up Luis Herrera on the run into St Etienne.
Well, if both of these riders could get together, then we're going to see an epic pursuit down the mountain. And as Paul says, it is a long way down, good straight roads, and speeds quite amazingly 50 to 60 miles an hour by the riders. They know the terrain, of course. They studied the itinerary the previous evening. Many of them remember the roads from previous Tours de France, and they arrange their gearing accordingly so they can actually put a high enough gear on the bicycle to allow them to pedal all the way down and thereby try and go faster. And Roche over the top now, and there indeed is the Luis Herrera. So Lucho is being caught by Stephen Roche, number 11. Remember, a rider with a 1 at the end of his number is the leader of his team, and for Stephen Roche this year, that has been a slight embarrassment because Stephen has not been a real challenger in this event because of injury, yet he's seen his teammate Jürgen Pedersen of Denmark lead. He's seen Guido Bontempi win a stage at Cherbourg, and of course he's seen Zimmermann challenge for that yellow jersey and remain currently in third place overall. So now the leader comes out to play. And Stephen Roach, feeling his form coming for the first time, is bridging the gap now across to Luis Herrera with the long descent down to Etienne to come. Herrera has got company, and I wonder if they can bridge between them the 3-minute gap up to Julian Gorospe. It would be absolutely marvellous if Stephen Roach could land the stage win today.
But Stephen's just gone straight past Herrera here. He's just left him. It just goes to show the return to form that Stephen's got there. And as you can see, the top half of his body's hardly moving at all, and he's just powering those pedals round. And this is a good sign of the return to form that Stephen has got, because the force has come back to his legs. He's been trying through the mountains. He's managed to get through these stages with the back group, and now he's just coming to form at the end of the Tour de France, which is a pity, because it was a Tour de France where we were expecting a fantastic ride from Stephen Roach, and he's just coming to show us that he's not dead and he's not to be forgotten.
Here's Greg LeMond now, Jean-Francois Bernard. And Greg LeMond almost went to the front, but decided better of it. He's dropped behind his teammate. Now, where is Hinault? And the gap has opened here. Now, Bernard Hinault is back in that bunch as far as we know. Riders beginning to take risks now on the descent.
And so are some of the motorcyclists. That's one of the big dangers of these descents, because the motorcyclists carrying the photographers and the film crews, they want to get the best pictures, so they get in as close as possible sometimes with risk to the ride, and they don't sometimes they don't seem to be worried. As long as they get the good pictures, that's the most important thing to them.
Yes, it's an amazing event, but of course to referee this event and to transmit it to television screens and of course to the newspapers, there are 2,500 people on the Tour de France, and there's only 135 of them riding a bike today. So you can see now as they go down, I was looking at that bunch here, we're looking at a group of riders here led by Greg LeMond that speeds now up to 40 miles an hour. I didn't catch sight of Robert Miller in this chasing group. They've caught Stephen Roach, and LeMond has come right upon Roach, and it looks as though Jean-Francois has gone clear here. So Jean-Francois Bernard, remember that great time trial he put in when we went down to gap?
And you see the position that Jean-Francois Bernard is taking here. This is so that he can get his head down as low as possible and become very, very aerodynamic, because he's got to a point in the descent here where even the big gears that he's got, it's very, very difficult to keep them going. So he gets into a position where he's aerodynamic and he just cuts into the wind, and it gives him a little bit of time to recuperate.
Well, still pedaling, and speeds approaching 50 miles an hour by these cyclists on the descent. This is one of the few descents in the Tour de France that our television cameras can go down at the same speed as the riders, because they're more or less straight roads, and they don't have to slow down for the bends, because the riders very rarely touch their brakes going around corners in the Alps. They really do take risks. And look at the gap here being opened now by Jean-Francois Bernard. He's got the help, of course, of his team leaders, Greg LeMond and Bernard Hinault. They will now slow down this group and try and get Bernard away to catch the leader, Julian Gorospe. Greg LeMond still in front with Stephen Roach, but not helping at all. Roach bringing LeMond back up to Bernard. Now Roach knows too he has a real problem here, because he has two riders in the same team, Lavie-Claire with him, Bernard and Greg, and they're not going to make any of the pace. They've come out, they've caught Roach, and they've almost surrounded him now, and they're taking him back to where he started from. But meanwhile, right on the finishing straight here, and we've come back to the finish now, Julian Gorospe is off the descent, and he has this little steady uphill climb to the finishing line. So Gorospe has indeed survived today. He's been in the lead for over half of the stage, and he's going to win today in Saint-Etienne. 4.5 hours in the saddle. And this will be a great result for Gorospe, because this is the capital of the cycle industry, and he rides for the Reynolds team. And so Gorospe comes home, an average speed there just below 25 miles an hour for today's stage. That is absolutely amazing. And you can tell it's told on Julian Gorospe. And we've got two riders now slightly ahead of that bunch. It looks to me that these two riders, and absolutely nobody on the commentary position here knows who they are, because nobody has told us. But it looks like one is possibly a Panasonic rider, and one could even be a teammate of Gorospe who's already home and dry. Because certainly they're not the Lavie-Claire team. It might well be Phil Anderson has managed to slip away on that descent towards the finish. And on that one bend alone, one of them has gone well clear with a very good turn indeed. Looks over his shoulder to see who is going to challenge him. Nobody, and it is Phil Anderson, so Anderson has escaped. And this will be a very, very good result for Phil. He's done nothing this tour. I think the other rider looks like Dominique Gard. And that it is Dominique Gard. So Anderson has left Dominique Gard by a nice piece of cornering on that right-hand bend into Etienne. Anderson knew that bend well. Remember a year ago, Anderson was blamed for the accident at that very point where Anderson is now that brought down Bernard Hinault, and Anderson was so annoyed when Hinault blamed him for that. Well, he's home in second place today, and a good cheer for Gard. Local man gets third place. And now the pack comes home, some 40 or 50 men fighting out the finishing line today. Zimmerman eases up. And a nice wave on the line there. He hasn't won though, and he might well think he has. It was Willem van Einde. Wouldn't surprise me if he thinks he was better than fourth on the day, because they often make the mistake. And the pack is in. And I'm afraid I've got to say that Robert Miller is not in that group and will lose ground overall today.
So, Julian Grospe takes the stage from Phil Anderson of Australia. Good to see him still showing, with Dominique Gard in third place. But Anderson's teammate, Robert Miller, trailed in way down the field again, obviously still suffering.